So we ended the year 2012 on the fiscal cliff, and we avoided it. Now, David Russell, we're headed toward, I don't know, the debt ceiling cliff, the sequester cliff, the spending cliff, or what?
Ethan Harris, who's an economist at Merrill Lynch, says we've gone from the fiscal cliff to the Three Gorges. There's we have the return of the across-the-board spending cuts at the beginning of March. We have the debt ceiling, which has to be raised, or the government won't have the cash to pay its bills.
Roughly at the same time.
Right. And then a few weeks later, we have the prospect of a government shutdown if they don't approve appropriation bills. So we worried for a while about kicking the can down the road. That's what they did. They made some tax increases permanent, but everything else is unresolved. And from what it seems to me, the relationship among the major players is worse than it was when we were ending the year.
And we're going to have to come up with a whole new set of metaphors. But this is the
I
new...
just did. Three Gorges.
Okay, but that's just one. We need several. But this is kind of the new normal, right?
That's right. And you'd think that since that we've all seen this movie before, in 2011 and 2012, the issues are all the same. The numbers are pretty much the same. It'd be just as easy to solve. But then, you have to wonder, they're going to come to a point when maybe they're going to drop one of these Hail Mary passes at the last second, and maybe something disastrous could happen. And it could happen soon.
Yeah, very soon. And I'd like to add the new metaphor. We're not kicking the can down the road. We're kicking it down like a half a block. I mean, we're talking about 1 month at a time.
Yeah.
And in fact, John Boehner has, in talking about debating the next debt ceiling increase, raised the possibility of, well, maybe we'll just raise it for a month.
Yeah.
And because Speaker Boehner, as you know, has had this formula that comes into play that he only wants to raise the debt ceiling by the same amount that they can find spending cuts. And it's hard to find $1 trillion worth of spending cuts, but maybe he could find a month's worth.
But if you start with the president wanting the debt ceiling essentially raised forever, and the House Speaker wanting to raise it 1 month at a time, we're not very close on that one, are we?
That's right. Well, the president's proposal about raising it essentially forever, I mean, that was kind of a hyperbolic opening bargaining position. I think what the president would really like is to not have to raise it again in his presidency. That's 3 years.
Which is what every president would want.
So if they could even just get it for a year or pass the next midterm, I think they mostly have to figure out whether or not the debt ceiling is going to be the place where they fight on the big spending cut questions, reforming entitlements and overhauling the tax code, or whether they're going to fight that fight on some other
Wouldn't they rather fight that fight on the question of whether to fund the government anymore or to shut it down? That's a better fight than the debt ceiling. Debt ceiling is toxic and radioactive and can really blow up in their faces. I'd rather have that fight on spending rather than on the debt ceiling.
I've stopped substituting my judgment for theirs. Yeah, I mean, we saw in August 2011 that leading people to wonder whether they're going to raise the debt ceiling is a very dangerous thing to do. It hurt the economy. And you'd think that the Republicans would rather not replay that thing. But I find it more unpredictable than usual. I don't know what you think. And I keep thinking that maybe Obama will try and deal with McConnell in the Senate and cut a deal there and then send it to the House rather than this trying to start with the House, which just seems to have not worked.
Right, and there is this problem that one residual from the fiscal cliff debate is that Speaker Boehner has said he doesn't want to negotiate one-on-one with the president anymore. So either he negotiates with somebody else or the White House goes to McConnell. I mean, Boehner has come up with this idea that he wants to return to regular order, which is the way, bills are supposed to become law. They go through a House committee, go to the House floor, they vote on it, and then it goes through the Senate. Well, that's probably not going to happen, but that's kind of his current position.
One of the risks here, too, is that there might not be a Republican position going into the debt ceiling. Maybe some of them want to use the debt ceiling as leverage, some of them don't. The White House says they're not even going to negotiate on the debt ceiling, so that, I think, can make it all the riskier if we get into mid-February and there isn't a partner for the White House to negotiate with or a position for the White House to have, then the markets are going to start getting really unsettled.
Well, that's a good point, because I think the Republican leadership probably doesn't want to play a game with a debt ceiling, but that doesn't mean all the Republican foot soldiers agree with that, and so you could have a split within their ranks on tactics on that. Plus, you have a Congress that's slightly more Democratic. Does that make any difference? If it's a few more Democrats in the House, a few more in the Senate, does it make any difference?
Well, maybe it makes some difference in the Senate because they're closer to, now they have 55 Democrats or people, Democrats and independents. So they're that much closer to the 60 vote threshold. But really the problem is in what you can get out of the House. And the handful more Democrats they have there doesn't make much of a difference.
Yeah. And meanwhile, markets seem to be like just humming along, blasé, totally oblivious to all this, which might be, frankly, the healthiest attitude, because if they're not in a panic, maybe everybody gets a calmer atmosphere to work it out.
I think it's more likely that if the markets are calm, then the politicians think they can play with mischief.
Yeah. A little panic would be a good thing.
Well, I don't actually believe that, but I can see how a little panic might get them to do something. It's very hard to explain the market's complacency on all this stuff. I mean, I hear the same thing from people who are very close to policy making in Europe, and they say, I don't understand why the markets aren't more panicked. I'm actually in the room and I'm panicked. So it's just, you know, it's like waiting for Godot, waiting for the markets to beat them over the head. I mean, you have all these businessmen coming screaming that, you know, you can't do this again, debt ceiling, blah, blah, blah. And then the collective wisdom of the investor class is, well, we're worried about something else.
Yeah. In 2011, during the debt ceiling fight, it was really the week before when markets really started to go haywire. And then, you know, the end of the week was the downgrade by S&P. But up until that, you know, last week, markets were still pretty stable.